Hi everyone, welcome to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Recruitment Training, also known as DEI. Today, we are hoping to reinforce ideas and definitions you may already know, and more importantly, connect these to the recruitment experience and provide active steps everyone can take towards self-improvement.
We hope to make these topics a continuous conversation instead of thinking of DEI as its own entity. DEI isn't something we can just choose to focus on once a month. We have to actively choose to put it at the forefront of our minds. Being able to choose when diversity, equity, and inclusion should be included in conversation is a privilege and not a choice some people have. Please take time in listening to this presentation. There will be a short survey quiz at the end.
We have to first talk about where we are as a community. Implementing temporary fixes to create a perception or avoid criticism around diversity, equity, and inclusion is a step backwards. We have to recognize that our efforts to avoid criticism or create online perceptions that we are diverse through tokenism is harmful to our marginalized members. Being truthful about where we are as a community and where we fall short is a key factor in making changes that will affect the root causes of the issues. While there have been many positive steps in the community, like so many chapters recognizing a new DEI position this year, we still have a long ways to go.
Equality versus equity. Equality is defined as ensuring that every individual has an equal opportunity to make the most of their lives and talents, and equity is defined as the fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people, while at the same time striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of this group. In the examples below, you can see that equity and equality are presented through two boys trying to pick apples. In the equality example, both boys have the same size ladder. However, the one on the right is at a disadvantage because his ladder is not tall enough to pick the apples. The equity example shows that both boys have ladders. However, the boy on the right has a taller one to meet his needs. The boy on the right now has the same opportunity as the boy on the left when picking apples. So a little bit more about equality versus equity. Equity is about giving help to those who need it, to ensure that everyone is given the same opportunities, and to focus on providing more support to those who are at a disadvantage. An example within Panhellenic would be asking the girls to buy the same outfit for recruitment. Not all may have the same resources or capability to do so. How can systematic change affect equality? So the most impactful changes to make the sorority experience more equitable are systematic changes. Systematic change is defined as a change that has to be fundamental and affects how the whole system functions. The biggest systematic change we as a community can make is cutting down unnecessary costs to move towards more affordable dues. This applies to recruitment because it is a large cost driver due to unnecessary frills. A frill is an unnecessary feature or embellishment. The goal of every chapter should be to host a values-based recruitment. This means focusing on a pillars of values of your chapters rather than impressing P&Ms with decorations and entertainment value items. An example of a frill would be having acceptable built-in patio lighting, but choosing to buy tiki torches or lanterns to make the patio look nice.
Starting off with some definitions, diversity is the blending of different identities, backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives within an organization or community, all of which impacts the way a person is perceived and received by others, as well as how they perceive and receive the world around them. Inclusion is defined as the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, such as those who have physical or mental disabilities and members of other minority groups. Some tips for being more inclusive during the recruitment process include treating every P&M like the unique individuals they are and getting to know them beyond the basics. Learning someone's story humanizes them and allows you to understand their perspective. It also allows you to be more inclusive of their experiences in the future. The more we understand something or someone, the easier it is for us to be inclusive and comfortable speaking about certain topics. Take the time to educate yourselves instead of straying away from tough conversations. Also consider using more inclusive language. Instead of saying, "Hey girl, come on in," consider using a more inclusive phrase for all identities, such as, "Hey, so glad I'm the one who gets to welcome you in." This is the gender-bread person. It's a useful tool in understanding the differences in a person's choice of identity. So gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, and sexual orientation are all independent of one another. You can scan the QR code at the bottom to learn more. These slides will also be available online. How is diversity versus inclusion related to social media? In the context of social media, we tend to highlight our marginalized members to attract more people like them. And while, of course, it's important to demonstrate diversity in your chapter's social media, if the proportions of women shown do not align with the actual culture or demographic of your chapter, it will be very clear to PNMs coming through recruitment. So please be mindful about how you're representing your chapters and be intentionally inclusive on your social media pages to all members.
Now to introduce the idea of implicit bias, we'll start with some definitions. According to NPC, implicit biases operates on a subconscious level, often runs contrary to your conscious beliefs, triggered through automatic mental associations we make between people, ideas, objects, and the attitudes and stereotypes we hold. Essentially, implicit biases are attitudes or stereotypes that we impose onto others without consciously thinking about it, unlike explicit biases. How it relates to recruitment. These biases can come up in different ways during the recruitment process, specifically in regards to interactions with PNMs. In meeting a PNM or any person, there is an inevitable invitation for implicit bias because this is a first encounter with the other person in a relatively fast-paced environment. When we hear, see, or experience new things, our brains are working to make meaning of this new experience. In making meaning, our brains are searching for previous interactions to help inform the current one. Not only do implicit biases affect face-to-face interactions with PNMs, but it can come up behind the scenes as well. For example, when chapters decide how to match up girls during recruitment based on similar social identities. In terms of social media, our implicit biases can change the way we interact with people as well as the decisions we make in terms of who we follow. For example, if we subconsciously interact more with people of a certain social identity and background on platforms such as Instagram, when following PNMs before recruitment, a similar pattern may be followed. This can lead to a sense of exclusivity and bias towards certain underrepresented groups of people. Our social media platforms can also contribute in creating implicit biases for others. The photos that chapters choose to post can play a role in affirming stereotypes. While it may not be on purpose, subconsciously posting the same groups of people who identify similarly can create an unwelcoming environment for PNMs who are considering joining. However, this does not mean that chapters should highlight members of certain ethnicities or backgrounds simply for seeming diverse, as this plays into the issue which will be mentioned later regarding tokenism. One of the most important tools in minimizing the effect of our implicit biases is acknowledging that we all have implicit biases and being aware of what areas we struggle in. In order to begin unlearning stereotypes that contribute to these biases, we should all learn how to reflect upon these stereotypes. A good resource for self-reflection is the Implicit Association Test, created by Project Implicit. However, this is not the only method of self-reflection. By looking at aspects of our everyday lives, such as who we follow on social media, what news we watch, the demographics of those we associate ourselves with, and more, we can begin to identify what identities we don't have enough interaction with and what gaps in knowledge we have to actively work on changing that. Specifically during recruitment, there's a responsibility on all members to mitigate the effects of our implicit biases. For those who are in charge of matching up PNMs and actives for recruitment, it is important to note that we should not assume that people will get along simply because of similar social identities. For example, just because two people may share the same race does not mean that they will share the same experiences. Pairings should be made based on shared values and personal identities. On the other hand, for active speaking to PNMs, there should be a focus on genuinely making an effort to learn about the PNM without prior assumptions. A way to minimize these stereotypes is to really think before we speak and process the information that we are telling others. However, if assumptions are made during a conversation, the best way to move forward is to apologize, ask for clarification, and take that experience as a way to improve in creating a more welcoming environment.
First, we can begin by defining microaggressions. These are brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative prejudicial slights and insights toward any group, particularly culturally marginalized groups. These subtle discriminatory actions are quite harmful and stem from a society built on the idea of superiority and prejudice. Some of these are shown in the picture here. We all have a proclivity to our own biases, but when individuals communicate those negative prejudices towards subtle actions to the minority groups within the PHA community, this is hurtful. Acknowledging our own biases and becoming consciously aware is the first step in combating unconscious harmful actions towards minority groups. Having these things be an active part of our recruitment planning and training as a community opens the discussion without calling upon members of a marginalized group to speak for their group. Here we have the definition of tokenism. This is a specific example of microaggressions seen within the recruitment process. This is when individuals belonging to a minority group are singled out within an organization to promote the sense of diversity or inclusivity. In the effort of giving off the appearance that there is representation within the chapter, the reality is it can leave those individuals feeling like their identities they bring to the chapter are the only ways that we see them. Tokenism can start with good intentions in an attempt to be more inclusive. When choosing to highlight marginalized members in an attempt to gain more members like them, we use social media outlets or other forms to showcase our members who represent those marginalized identities. Paying attention to the intent behind your actions and choices is the first step, and fostering an environment of inclusion that does not display members in order to create a sense of diversity should be continuously present within our recruitment process and community. Ways to actively change during the recruitment process include focusing on honoring and embracing members without singling them out or spotlighting them just because of the differences they bring to the chapter. Focus on overall inclusion rather than simply seeking out diversity. Utilize tools such as books, videos, and other non-human ways of educating our members without calling upon members to educate the rest of the chapter.
The last topic to be covered is intent versus impact. The easiest way to understand this topic is to break it down. Intent is what one thinks or feels during an action or conversation. This is usually the reason or motivation behind the situation. It is what you thought you were doing. One example of this is, it meant to be a compliment. Impact, on the other hand, is how that action or conversation makes the other person feel. In other words, it is how it is perceived by the other person. Someone might address this by saying, "It seems like you were," and then expressing how it made them feel, like, "It seemed like you were trying to be rude." When we talk about intent versus impact, we are talking about how what you said may not be what they heard. It's almost like a game of telephone, where the information and intent is lost in translation. One common saying that relates to the idea of intent versus impact is that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. This concept refers to the idea that one person's intentions and another's perception or experience are both valid. While what the person is saying may be said with the best intentions in mind, sometimes the delivery does not convey the correct meaning or reasoning. In any situation, context is key. An example of intent versus impact during recruitment is oral bidding. By saying something like, "See you tomorrow," you might be saying something that you would in a normal conversation when parting ways with someone. However, in this setting, it is seen as a promise. It implies that they will be returning or invited back to the chapter the following day, when in reality, this may not be the case and it could hurt their feelings later. In terms of social media outreach, this provides a different problem. Our policy prevents interaction with PNMs after they have registered for recruitment. If a PNM continues to reach out to you with questions involving recruitment, please send them to an RC or someone on the Panhellenic Executive Board. A PNM could perceive this halted conversation as you are no longer interested in talking to them, so please make sure to kindly explain the circumstances.
Thank you for listening to our presentation. I hope everyone learned or gained something new today. We want to encourage everyone to continue your own education on these topics, both in the context of recruitment and day-to-day in your own lives.
Here we have some additional resources for you. And here's our team. Thank you so much.